Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Toldos, begins on page 125 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash. And it begins, these are the offspring of Yitzhak, son of Avraham. Avraham begot Yitzhak. And then it continues, Yitzhak was 40 years old when he took Rivka, daughter of Besul the Aramean from Padan Aram, sister of Lavan the Aramean, as a wife for himself. That's a very good question. And I'll talk about that a little bit. But it continues, Yitzhak entreated Hashem opposite his wife because she was barren. Hashem allowed himself to be entreated by him, and his wife Rivka conceived. Okay, and we'll go into the children. But before I get into Alan's question, which I'll mention in a second for those aren't here, but it begins that these are the offspring of Yitzhak, son of Avraham. Avraham begot Yitzhak. So it starts off telling us that we're going to talk about Yitzchak's descendants, and then it says who Yitzchak's father was, not his descendants. So the commentators ask why it does that, and the Medrash says that when Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak, Avraham was 100 years old, and a short time before that, before Sarah conceived, she was kidnapped by Avimelech, and who was the king of Gerar, the king of the Philistines, and people who were mocking, says the Leitzane Hadar, those who the comedians of the generation, those who mocked in the generation, would say that Abraham was married to Sarah for so long, he's 100 years old, he didn't have any children. All of a sudden, Sarah is kidnapped by Avimelech, and all of a sudden she has a son. It must be the son is not from Abraham, rather it's from Avimelech. It's Avimelech's son. Good. So that's why the Parsha says, these are the offspring of Yitzchak, son of Avraham. Avraham begot Yitzchak. It was clear that Avraham was the father of Yitzchak, and it wasn't Ishmael. And the Medrash says that Hashem made Yitzchak's face identical to Avraham's, that he looked exactly like Avraham, so it was clear to everyone that he was Avraham's son. But Rav Shimon Schwab asked, so if that's the case, why is that mentioned here? That would be more appropriate to mention where Yitzchak was born. Why does it wait all the way till here to say that? So he answers that we're about to talk about their children as it begins. These are the offspring of Yitzchak, son of Abraham. And Yitzchak, son of Abraham, had two sons. He had Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov being righteous and Esav being wicked. So when people see Esav, they see this Russia, they see this wicked person. That people would say that it's impossible that he's the son of Avraham and Rivka. Avraham is Yitzchak and Rivka. Yitzchak is this great righteous person. Rivka is this great righteous person. So it must be that Yitzchak was in fact not a son of Avraham. He was a son of Avimelech, and that the wickedness of Avimelech came out in his son in that wickedness came out and came to fruition in Esav. And because of that, it says here that no, in fact, Yitzchak was Abraham's son, and that was clear to everyone looking. Okay, and then Ellen asked me that it says Yitzchak was 40 years old when he took Rivka, daughter of Besul the Aramean from Padan Aram, sister of Lavan the Aramean, as a wife for himself. So Alan was asking me, yes, Alan? That's yes.
Some common
yes, she was 3. Right. Some commentaries say she was 3. That's a Medrash that she was 3. And the reason why they say that is because at the binding of Yitzhak, immediately after the binding of Yitzhak, the Torah talks about Rivka being born. Yitzhak was 37 at the time, and she was born, and they got married when Yitzhak was 40, so she was 3 years old. That's the Medrash. Rav Shimon Schwab actually brings commentaries that there are midrashim that say she was actually 14 at the time, right? That it seems very unlikely, and there are midrashim that Rivka was 14 when she got married, so he wants to say that it wasn't that Rivka was born at the time of the binding of Yitzhak. It was just that at the binding of Yitzhak had such spiritual growth through this incredible experience that Rivka, who was destined to be his wife, now since Yitzchak changed, she needed to change too. And she got a new neshama, she got a new soul at the time. And he wants to suggest that it was actually his mother, Sarah, who died at that time, that her soul went to Rivka. But and he has some midrashim that suggest that. But as Ellen was asking, why does it have to go through so much when it talks about who Rivka was? He was 40 years old when he took Rivka, daughter of Besul the Aramean, so her father was in his nationality, from Padan Aram, that she was from Padan Aram, and sister of Lavan the Aramean, sister of Lavan, who happened to be an Aramean as well. So I saw one of the commentaries, it might have been the Klei Yakar, I don't remember, and I was actually looking for this before the class and couldn't find it, but I did see in the commentaries that they suggest that Yitzhak, that the Torah is trying to answer that question. Where did Esav come from? That Yitzhak wasn't from Avimelech. Yitzhak was born a son of Avram. Rivka was incredibly righteous. Where did this Esav come from? And that the answer to that is here. Right, but that has to come from somewhere. That's what they're suggesting, that those bad midas, there's some impurity mixed into the bloodline. And we're saying that impurity, that's what it's trying to tell us here, that her father was Besul the Aramean. Who was Besul, not only was he Besul, he was from Aram. Exactly. And her brother was Lavan the Aramean. And very many times people say, if you want to know the character of a woman's son, look at the uncle, look at her brothers. Because that's going to, that's a good indicator of what the son is going to look like. Meaning she's a woman, so the son's not necessarily going to look like her, but they will look like her brothers. And since you had that, her father was Besuel, a wicked person who was an Aramean, her brother was Lavan, who was an Aramean, so that impurity had to go somewhere, and in fact, it went to Esav. And the commentaries say that one of the reasons why Esav was born first, and we'll get into this soon, but Rivka said, if this is the case, it says that, I'll continue and get back to this, okay? I'll continue just because why talk about later before saying it. So in but first of all, it says in verse 21, Yitzhak entreated Hashem opposite his wife because she was barren. Hashem allowed himself to be entreated by him, and his wife Rivka conceived. The children agitated within her, and she said, if so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of Hashem. In verse 23, and Hashem said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 regimes from your inside shall be separated. The might shall pass from one regime to the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. And in fact, on page 127, when she gave birth, and verse 24, when her term to bear grew full, then behold, there were twins in her womb. The first one emerged red entirely like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esav. After that, his brother emerged with his hand grasping onto the heel of Esav, so he called his name Yaakov. Yitzhak was 60 years old when she bore them. Okay, so the commentaries ask, first of all, why was it with Avraham, before having Yitzhak, had a son, Ishmael, who was wicked. And now Yitzhak, before having Yaakov, had Esav, who was wicked. Why is it that our forefathers, that first they had a wicked son and then they had the righteous one? Why wouldn't first of all, why was that necessary, and why isn't the righteous one the firstborn? So the commentaries say that the Medrash actually compares it to cleaning a pipe or cleaning a bathtub, but that it says that when you have water sitting in a pipe, it accumulates rust and whatever, it accumulates dirt from the pipe. So you don't want to use the water that's sitting there. As an aside, some people say that you should let the water run in the morning until you feel the water get cold. So you're not using the water that's been sitting in the pipes all night. You don't want all the minerals leaching in there. So in order to clean the pipes, in a sense, of Avram, whatever impurity he had, let's say through his father, who was an idolater. So Avram first had a son, Yishmael. That was where the impurities that accumulated went. And only after that did he have his son, Yitzhak, who was righteous. But that was from 2 different wives, meaning that was from, first Avram had Yishmael from his wife Hagar, and then he had Yitzhak from his wife Sarah. So now when it continues with Rivka, it said Rivka conceived, and the children agitated within her, and she said, if so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of Hashem. some of the commentaries say that which disturbed Rivka so much is that the Medrash says that they agitated that when she passed by an idolatrous temple, there was agitation of a baby trying to get out, and when she passed by a shul or a Torah study hall, there was the agitation of the baby trying to get out. So she said that it would seem that I have a righteous son and a wicked son. And if that's the case, and why am I thus? Because my predecessor, Sarah, she didn't have a wicked son. And if it's necessary to have a wicked, if it's necessary to clean the pipes in a sense, why is it that we didn't have Yitzhak marry someone else to get rid of that? Get rid of that, and I'll just have the righteous one.
Abraham's first son said was wicked. He not originally wicked. He was told by Hashem that proceed onward, mighty, and he would have many people following.
That's correct.
Mighty nation. He initially was not wicked.
He went through a lot in life. Yishmael is a complicated character. He was wicked, but our sages say at the end of his life he did tshuva. He repented. Yeah. Right, you're right. In the beginning he wasn't, then he was, then our sages say he did tshuva at the end of his life, and he wasn't again. But at the end of the day, his descendants, the nation that came from him is not Yitzhak. It's not the Jewish people, meaning that there was somewhere for this impurity to go where it wouldn't go into the Jewish people. That's correct. It's not that he was all bad. There was some good in him, but she was disturbed by this. That why is it her? And to that the Hashem answered. She went to the Shem and Aver. And they answered her, two nations are in your womb, two regimes from your inside shall be separated. The might shall pass from one regime to the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. And our sages say that this is referring to two great descendants of Rivka. One of them being Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who was the great Tana, the compiler of the Mishnah. And the other was a close friend of his, who was Antoninus, who was the Caesar, the Roman Caesar. And our sages say, who was a descendant of Esau. And our sages say that Antoninus risked his life to sneak secretly into Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's study to study Torah with him. And he did great things for the Jewish people because of his friendship with Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. And that's what she was telling. That's what Hashem was telling her, is that there's good in Esav too, and that good will be embodied by Antoninus, the Caesar. Other explanations that they give for this, the children agitated within her, and she said, "If so, why am I thus?" I think it's the one of the Rishonim. I think it's the Rebbe Bachya, understands that she didn't know that it was two nations. She didn't know that there were two babies. She thought it was only one. And when she saw that when she passed by an idolatrous temple, a pagan temple, it would be try to get out. And when she passed by a shul, it would try to get out. So she said it would seem that there are multiple deities. That if it's going after these deities and Hashem, it would seem that there are multiple deities. And if so, how am I different than anyone else? If I'm worshiping Hashem, if there are other deities as well, so there's no difference. And then it says that she went to inquire of Hashem. The Hebrew is lidrashas Hashem. Literally could be understood. She went to search Hashem, meaning that she went to reinforce her belief in Hashem because of this. That she was shaken by that. And then she was told that there were two, one going after one going after the other. Okay, so moving on. In 127, we said that that she had twins. First was Esav, and then the brother emerged with his hand grasping onto the heel of Esav, so he called his name Yaakov. Yaakov was 60, Yitzhak was 60 years old when she bore them. And I just say that his hand was grasping onto the heel of Esav symbolizes that Esav will rule. But at the end of days, Yaakov will conquer Esav. That he's grasping onto his heel. That he's going to follow him, and pull him down at the end of days. Now in verse 27, the lads grew up, and Esav became one who knows hunting, a man of the field. But Yaakov was a wholesome man, abiding in tents. Yitzhak loved Esav, for game was in his mouth, but Rivka loved Yaakov. So game was in his mouth literally means that he hunted and gave Yitzhak to eat. Rashi, though, brings the medrash that what this means is that he was Esav was a master con man, and game was in his mouth, meaning he was able to trick Yitzhak, and he was able to convince him that he was really righteous through asking through his stomach. That's correct. Usually the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, Ellen, but we're talking about people that we have to understand are beyond that. And it wasn't just he enjoyed the food, but there was something that Esav did for him that made him actually got his attention and believed that Esav was greater than he was. I saw, I think it was the Beis Halevi or Shem Shmuel, one of them, who said that later in the Parsha, when he wanted Esav to bring him the game in order to bless him, is that Esav, there was one area that Esav excelled in his service of Hashem, and that was in honoring his father. That it wasn't just that Esav played a game to get his father's attention and to convince his father he was righteous by being nice to him, but he really honored his father. He really did. And because of that, when Yitzchak ate his food, he sensed the holiness there from the mitzvah of the honoring his father, and that gave him this great pleasure. And we'll maybe talk about that later when we get there. But it says that Rivka loved Yaakov. Rivka recognized Esav for what he was. Rivka, remember, was a son of Bethuel, a daughter of Bethuel, a brother of Lavan. She knew a con man when she saw one. Yeah.
Sister.
Yeah. She was a sister of Lavan, a daughter of Bethuel. So in verse 29, on page 127, Yaakov simmered a stew, and Esav came in from the field, and he was exhausted. Esav then said to Yaakov, "Pour into me now some of that very red stuff, for I am exhausted." He therefore called his name Edom, which means red. Yaakov said, "Sell as this day your birthright to me." And Esav said, "Look, I'm going to die, so what use to me is the birthright?" Yaakov said, "Swear to me as this day." He swore to him and sold his birthright to Yaakov. Yaakov gave Esav bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, got up and left. Thus, Esav spurned the birthright. So first it calls it a stew, then later it mentions that it was in fact a lentil stew. And the Medrash says that this stew that he was stewing, this lentil stew, was the traditional food that was given in a mourner's house. And that's because this was the house of mourning when after Avram had died. So, and that's what Yaakov was cooking up a lentil stew for the mourners. And that was something that inspired Esav, where Esav said, "Look, I'm going to die, but as to what use of me is my birthright," is that this mourning, and especially the lentil soup, which was the food of mourning, inspired Esav to see his own mortality. And I saw in, I think, the Rabbi Parsha, that Yaakov caused Esav to recognize that he's a man of violence. And he was going out in the field to hunt, and he would, the Medrash says that he would steal people's wives. And he was a violent person. And he recognized that he's not living a safe life, and he doesn't necessarily have much of a future. And that's why he was saying, "Look, I'm about to die, so what use to me is a birthright," meaning that the way things are going, I might just die before my father. So there's no point in thinking about any inheritance. And I may as well think about today rather than tomorrow. And right. And which brings to, this might answer a little bit a question, that it says he said, "Pour to me some of the very red stuff, for I am exhausted." And he therefore called his name Edom. They called him red because he said, "Pour to me some of his red stuff." So this is heard from my Shiva Chaim Bressler that he asked that why is that so significant? Like this was such a significant event in his life, such a significant statement that this defined who he was. This is what gave him his nickname. That he said, "Give me some of that red stuff," so they called him Red. And the way he phrased it is, if he would have said, "Can I have a bowl of Cheerios?" Would they call him Cheerios? He asked for some food, and they gave him some food. Why is it that this is what defined him to the point that this became his name? So he answered that what's important here is that when he was hungry, he wanted some food, he wanted some lentil soup. And instead of asking, could I please have some lentil soup? Instead of looking at the food and seeing what it is, all he said is that red stuff. What it is didn't bother him. Well, the nutrition that it had, the heat, the substance wasn't important to him. What mattered was the surface. All he saw is that it's red. He was hungry and he saw something red and wanted that. All that he saw was the surface. He didn't see any substance. And that defines who Esav was. Esav was a person who wasn't looking at deeper than, he wasn't looking any deeper than what he saw in front of his face. And that's another reason why, as it says, look, I'm going to die. So what used to me as a birthright is that he just saw the surface. He was living in the moment. And he said, right now I'm alive, right now I want to eat, and maybe right now I'll make some money off the sale. Why should I be concerned about a birthright that comes later? I'm living in the moment, I'm living it today. And that's why he sold it. And just as an aside, the Ramban says that there's actually an opinion where it says, sell me this day your birthright to me. The Ramban says that there's a question here. Was the sale directly in exchange for the lentils? Did Esav sell his firstborn birthright for a bowl of lentils? And the Ramban says yes, but he says that there are other commentaries, namely the father, the Radak, Rabbi Kimchi says in the name of his father, that it was actually a sale for an agreed upon price. Just Esav came in hungry and he said, give me some of that red stuff? And Yitzhak, seeing an opportunity, asked him, so before I give you the food, let's make a deal. And he used that hunger to pressure him into selling, but he was actually selling, they actually agreed on a price for the birthright other than the lentil soup. The Ramban doesn't agree with this though. He's okay with this, but he says what would seem more correct is that he actually was a direct exchange, the lentil soup for the birthright. And the commentaries say that the birthright here isn't referring to what nowadays, according to Torah law, is the birthright, that a firstborn gets a double portion in the state. That over here, what's referring to is because Esav wouldn't give up money like that necessarily. It's referring to the importance and the spiritual legacy of the father, that the firstborn would take on the titles of the father and the significance really of the father. And in this case, it's talking about the legacy of being the Jewish people and taking on that legacy of being the foundation of the Jewish people, that Esav said, what use do I have for that? Okay. And they got up and left, and thus Esav spurned the birthright. Okay, on page 129, chapter 26. There was a famine in the land aside from the first famine that was in days of Avram, and Yitzhak went to Avimelech, king of the Philistines, to Gerar. Yes, the Philistine king. So Avraham did the same thing, but in a previous famine, Avraham went to Egypt.
Is that just the title?
That's a good question. So the commentaries say, I think it was the Ramban, says that he's not sure if that's that happened to be the name of the king, and this is the same guy, or that's just the title that they use. The way that the king of the king of Egypt is called Paro, perhaps the king of the Philistines was called Avimelech, and in fact, Avimelech would mean like my father, the king, the king father. So it would follow that it's a title. So it continues that Hashem appeared to him and said, do not descend to Egypt, dwell in the land that I indicate to you. And Rashi says this indicates that he did intend to go down to Egypt, and he would do that following in his father Avram's footsteps, who went to Egypt in a famine. But Hashem told him that you should not go to Egypt because you were brought as an offering on an altar. You should not leave the land of Israel. Okay, and he continues in verse 3, sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you, to you and your offspring will I give these lands and establish the oath that I swore to Avram your father. So now Hashem is affirming that he is in fact, they want to carry on the legacy of Avram to be the foundation of the Jewish people. And Hashem swore to him that he will get this land. And I will increase your offspring like the stars of the heavens. I will give to your offspring all these lands, and all the nations there shall bless themselves by your offspring, because Avram obeyed my voice and observed my safeguards, my commandments, my decrees, and my Torahs. So Yitzchak settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, she is my sister, for he was afraid to say my wife, lest the people of the place kill me because of Rivka, for she is fair to look upon. Right. So Avram did the same thing in Egypt and in Gerar in the Philistine, amongst the Philistines. And our sages say that why was it that Rivka, or really Yitzchak said that he would be killed because of her, but what did he see that caused him to say that she's my sister? It's because that the men of the place asked about his wife. That when the people saw him, they didn't say, hi, how you doing, and talk to him. They were asking already about his wife immediately, so he saw that he was in danger. And in fact, in the Hebrew could be understood. The Hebrew is Vayishalu Anshe HaMakom Li'ishtai in Pasuk Zayin verse 7. I'm sorry, in Pasuk Zayin verse 7, literally means they asked to his wife, and they understood that they were asking her about him, and that lack of tznius, the lack of modesty, got him concerned. Okay, and so that's what he did. And in verse 8, and it came to pass as his days there lengthened, that Avimelech, king of the Philistines, gazed down through the window and saw, behold, Yitzchak was jesting with his wife Rivka. Meaning, he looked through the window, he was suspicious, and I saw the commentary say, that Avimelech was curious why he hadn't gotten married. Why is this guy Yitzchak living amongst us and living single with his sister? Finally, he found a wife, and he looked in the window and saw them acting as husband and wife. So Avimelech summoned Yitzchak and said, but look, she is your wife. How could you say she's my sister? And Yitzchak said to him, because I said that I would have been killed, that I would be killed because of her. And page 131, verse 10, Avimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people has nearly lain with your wife, and you have brought guilt upon us. The Medrash says that he's talking about himself. And Avimelech then warned all the people, saying, whoever molests this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. One of the reasons why he's being so careful, which is a theme that comes up in the commentaries, especially in the Ramban, is that we saw previously that when Abraham was with the Philistines, living amongst the Philistines, they made a covenant with Abraham that they won't harm, they and their descendants won't harm him and his descendants. So if they would be harming Yitzhak, they would immediately be breaking this oath. So he was very concerned about that, and he made a law: whoever bothers them will be put to death. Then in verse 12, Yitzchak sowed in that land, and that year he reaped 100-fold, meaning he produced 100 times what you'd expect to produce. Thus had Hashem blessed him. The man became great and kept becoming greater until he was very great. He had acquired flocks and herds and many enterprises, and the Philistines envied him. And then they plugged up the wells that Avram had dug. And in verse 16, and Avimelech said to Yitzchak, go away from us, for you have become much mightier than we. And the commentaries comment that you have become mightier than we. The Hebrew, asamtem imenu, could be read as you have become mighty from us, meaning that they saw him as a parasite. They said that you're becoming rich on our backs, that you're living amongst us, and you're sowing our land, and you're becoming wealthy. You're taking away our wealth. So they expelled him and said, and Avimelech said to Yitzchak, go away from us, for you become much mightier than we. He was expelled from them because he was being so successful. And the commentaries say that this is repeated itself many times throughout our history, that Jews move into a place and they're start being successful, and the nation that they move in starts getting jealous and starts looking at them as parasites and taking away their wealth. That happened over and over and over throughout our history.
In the US.
Yes.
Nubians.
Yes, that the Jews are, running the show, and they call us parasites. So moving on. So, what's that?
Our sites instead of
Entrepreneurs, exactly. Yeah. So in verse 17, so Yitzchak departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar, meaning away from the city, and dwelled there. And Yitzchak dug and knew the wells of water which they had dug in the days of Avram's father. And then we have a whole section about Avram's servants digging wells. that it says they found a fresh well of water and they called that one Ashek, which means like fighting. And then they dug another well and they called also that over that one with the people of Gerar. So they called this name Sitna, which means hatred. And then they relocated and dug another well, which they did not quarrel over. So they called this name Rechovos, which means that Rechovos means breadth, ample space. And the Ramban says, what's this whole, all the importance of all this talk about the wells that the servants of Yitzhak dug? And he says that these wells that we said that everything that our forefathers do is setting a precedent what will happen to us. And these wells are symbolize the Beis HaMikdash, the temples. Is that the first one? It says they quarreled and called it what was it? And they called it whatever they called it, fighting, and that's about the first Beis HaMikdash. The second one, which they was also destroyed, was also plugged up, is about the second Beis HaMikdash, and the third one called Rechovos, we have space and tranquility, is symbolizes the third Beis HaMikdash may be built speedily in our days. Another thing that the Ramban says about this whole chapter of Yitzhak going to Gerar, going to live amongst the Philistines, that he said about Avram going down to Mitzrayim, going down to Egypt for a famine. He says that was the precedent for our forefathers going to Egypt, being exiled in Egypt. And he said this exile of Yitzhak going to the Philistines in a famine it symbolizes the exile to Babylon, which when our forefathers were exiled by the Babylonians after the destruction of the first temple, so they were terrified when they went there, but they didn't have it that bad when they were in Babylon for the most part. That it says that they became important people in Babylon, and they became leaders in the country. And in fact, our sages said, that we had the great centers of Torah study were in Babylon more than in the land of Israel, even after the building of the second temple. And there were for thousands of years we had these great yeshivas in Babylon. That were the Gemara, the Talmud came from the discussions of those students. Okay, and moving on, in verse 23, he went up from there to Beersheba on page 133, verse 23. He went up from there to Beersheba. Hashem appeared to him that night and said, I am the God of your father Avram. Fear not, for I am with you. I'll bless you and increase your offspring because of Avram, my servant. He built an altar there, invoking Hashem by name, and he pitched his tent there. Yitzchak's servants dug a well. And then Avimelech went to him from Gerar with a group of his friends and Fichel, general of his legion. Yitzchak said to him, why have you come to me? You hate me and drove me away from you. And they said, we have indeed seen that Hashem has been with you. So we said, let the oath between ourselves now be between us and you. Let us make a covenant with you. If you do evil with us, just as we have not molested you, and just as we have done with you only good, and sent you away in peace, now you, O blessed of Hashem. So what's this now you, O blessed of Hashem? So based on what we said earlier, that they saw Yitzhak prosper and be successful in their land, and they accused him of being a parasite and prospering on their backs and sucking them dry. Now they expelled them and saw his continued success. They said, we were wrong, and they admitted we were wrong, and you are blessed of Hashem. Now you're blessed of Hashem. Now we see your blessing comes from Hashem. You weren't prospering, it was taking away from us. And why are they making a covenant with him? And like we said, that they had previously made a covenant with Avram. The Philistines made a covenant with Avram, and they really broke it by expelling his son Yitzhak. His son Yitzhak came there because of a famine, and he's living amongst them, and they expel him. That's not in keeping with their covenant, with their treaty of, not to treat each other badly. They treated him badly, so therefore they want to renew the covenant between them, and in order that they shouldn't be in friction. So they made a feast, ate and drank, etc. So now in verse 34, at the bottom of 133, when Esau was 40 years old, he took a wife, Yehudis, daughter of Be'eri the Hittite, and Basmas, daughter of Elan the Hittite. They were a source of spiritual rebellion to Yitzhak and Rivka. They were hurt that Esau married Canaanite women. So now, chapter 27 on page 135, we have the chapter of the blessings, Yitzhak trying to bless his sons. So it begins on page 135, and it came to pass when Yitzhak had become old and his eyes had dimmed from seeing that he summoned Esau, his older son, and said to him, my son, and I said to him, here I am. And he said, see, now I have aged. I know not the day of my death. Now sharpen, if you please, your gear, your sword, and your bow. Go out in the field and hunt game for me. Then make me delicacies such as I love and bring it to me, and I will eat so that my soul may bless you before I die. So it says that his eyes dimmed from seeing, that he was blind. And Rashi gives three reasons. One of them was that Esau, it says, married these Canaanite women, and they would light incense to their pagan deities. And Yitzhak was so spiritually sensitive that that's the smoke of their incense blinded him, that his eyes couldn't tolerate it. Another one is that he was old, and it allowed this whole scheme to work. That it allowed Yitzhak to Yaakov to, as we'll see, that he disguised himself as Esau, which his father being blind made it a lot easier. It's a lot easier to disguise yourself if the person you're trying to trick is blind. And another, there's a medrash though that says that when Yitzhak was bound on the altar, the angels wept when they saw him bound to be slaughtered, and those tears went into his eyes and caused him to be blind. So, this is obviously has a deeper meaning, and I think it's Reb Shimon Schwab explains this, that we find that angels, we've seen before that angels have very specific tasks. And like we saw that there was an angel sent to heal, there was an angel sent to heal Avram, there was an angel sent to give, and a separate angel to give the good news about the birth of Yitzhak, and a separate angel to destroy Sodom. That angels have very specific tasks. And these angels that were crying were angels of mercy. That even though Avram was doing and Yitzhak were doing a great mitzvah, fulfilling the will of Hashem and passing the greatest test that Avram was subjected to, but at the same time, these angels were purely of mercy, and to them, they couldn't tolerate seeing an act of cruelty, even though it was a great mitzvah. So they were weeping. And that had an effect on Yitzhak. That these angels were weeping had an effect on Yitzhak, and caused his eyes to be affected by their great mercy, and his outlook changed as well. And because of that, he was blind to Esau, meaning he was blind to the sins of Esau, and these basically he had that effect of the angels of mercy, that he always saw the good, and he only saw the good in his son Esau, and wasn't able to sense the bad. Okay, that's just another way of looking at it. Okay, so anyway, so Yitzhak told Esau to go get delicacies to eat, and I bless before I die. From game. So in verse 5, now Rivka was listening as Yitzhak spoke to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt game to bring. But Rivka said to Yaakov her son, saying, behold, I heard your father speaking to your brother Esau, saying, bring me some game and make me delicacies to eat, and I will bless you in the presence of Hashem before my death. So now, my son, heed my voice, there which I command you. Go now to the flock, fetch me from there 2 choice young kids of the goats, and I will make of them delicacies for your father as he loves. Then bring it to your father, and he shall eat, that he may bless you before his death. Okay, so now where does Rivka get the chutzpah to do that? Her husband, the great Yitzhak, wants to bless Esau. Who's Rivka to intervene? So I think it's the Ramban says, but the commentaries say that, remember at the beginning of the Parsha, when she was troubled by the kicking of the babies inside, the fighting of the babies, so she went and inquired of Hashem, and Hashem said to her, the prophet said, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 regimes from your inside shall be separated. The might shall pass from one regime to the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. So she had already a prophetic, was told by the prophet that the elder shall serve the younger, that Yaakov, the younger one, will be the main son of Yitzchak. And because she had this prophecy, she wasn't told by the prophet to reveal this to her husband, to Yitzhak, so she did not. But she knew that this was the right thing to do through a prophecy, and that's where she got that chutzpah to do it. So in verse 11, Yaakov replied to Rivka's mother, but my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man, on page 137. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall be a mocker in his eyes. I will thus bring upon myself a curse rather than a blessing. So the Beis Yitzchak asks, why does he shall be a mocker in his eyes? Well, what does that mean? He's a mocker. He's a thief. He's stealing a blessing. He's stealing. He's a con man. He's committing fraud. In what way is he mocking? But Yitzchak.
His brother sold him the honor
Right.
for a bowl of soup.
But Yitzchak didn't know that. So what does it mean that in his he's saying, in my father's eyes, I'll be a mocker? Why is he saying in his father's eyes he'd be a mocker? Either if his father knew that, so then he would just give the blessing to him. What's this about mockery? So anyway, the Beis Yitzchak answers that imagine you have you see somebody run over to shoplift in a store. Clearly, someone walk into the store, fill up a backpack with stuff in the store, and run out. So if the person is someone who you know is a thief, you say, okay, he's stealing. That's what a thief does. He's doing what he does. He's a thief. If it's someone you don't know, you see he's stealing because that's what it looks like he's doing. What if you see a great rabbi walk into a store, fill up his backpack with stuff, and run out? You say, he's gone crazy. He lost his mind, because we know he's not a thief. So we know that he's a righteous person. We know he's not a thief. He must have just gone meshuggah. So that's the case here. Yitzchak was saying, my father knows I'm not a thief. He knows I'm not a con man. We said that Yaakov was an ishtam. He was a simple man, meaning that he wasn't complex. He was honest. And so he said, my father would never think that I'm a thief. He would think that I'm going meshuggah. I'm mocking. I'm a mocker. So in verse 13, but his mother said to him, you're cursed be on me, my son, only heed my voice and go fetch them for me. So he went and fetched and brought his mother, and his mother made him delicacies that his father loved. Rivka then took her older son Esau's clean garments, which were covered in the house, and clothed Yaakov, her young son, with the skins of goatkins. She covered his arms and his smooth skin neck. She placed the delicacies and the bread which she had made into the hands of her son Yaakov. See. Okay, so in verse 18 on page 137, and he came to his father and said, Father, and he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? And he said, her father said, who are you, my son? Yaakov said to his father, is I, Esau, your firstborn? I have done as you told me. Rise up, please sit and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. Yitzhak said to his son, how is that you were so quick to find my son? And he said, because Hashem, your God, arranged it for me. And Yitzhak said to Yaakov, come close, if you please, so I can feel you, my son. Are you indeed my son, Esau? So Yaakov drew close to Yitzhak, his father, who felt him and said, the voice is Yaakov's voice, but the hands are Esau's hands. But he did not recognize him because his hands were very hairy, like the hands of Esau, his brother, so he blessed him. And I say to say this, the voice is Yaakov's voice, but the hands are Esau's hands, is a key of defining Yaakov and Esau. That Esau's power is his hands, that he is a man of war. His power comes from his physical body and especially his hands, which are what make a man mighty. Whereas Yaakov's power does not come from his hands. Yaakov's power comes from his mouth. It's for his voice that we have that we could daven, we could study Torah, and especially we could cry out to Hashem. And that's where our strength comes from. And the voice of Yaakov overcomes the hands of Esau. Okay, so, and he said, I am. And in verse 25, he said, serve me and let me eat of my son's game, that my soul may bless you. So he served him and he ate, and he brought him wine and he drank. So Yaakov asked Esau to bring him the game, bring him, how did he speak it out? Go out to the field, hunt game for me, then make me delicacies such as I love, and bring it to me so I may eat them, my soul may bless you before I die. Hunt game and bring me those delicacies. Whereas Rivka gave him, it says, 2 kids, 2 goats, bread, and then he served him wine. So where did the bread and wine come from? And our sages say that this was Pesach. It was Pesach when he brought it. And the 2 young goats, one was for the Pesach, the Paschal offering, and one was for the Korban, the Chagiga offering, the offering to enjoy good meat on Yantiv. And the bread was the matzah, and the wine was for the 4 cups. And this brings to a saying that our forefathers kept the Torah. And even though at this point in time, at this point in history, we hadn't left Egypt, we hadn't had the mitzvah to slaughter a goat and put the blood on the doorposts that were remembering with the Paschal lamb. We didn't have, what's that?
Sorry.
It was a lamb. It was either a sheep or a goat. The Paschal lamb technically could have been either. Yeah. Yes. They didn't yet have be kicked out of Pesach, kicked out of Egypt so quick that they couldn't let the dough rise to which we're symbolizing with the matzah, and they weren't saved with the 4 expressions of redemption that we're symbolizing with the 4 cups of wine. So what's the meaning of all of this? So the commentaries say that this goes to tell us that that Jewish history isn't the way it seems, and the holidays aren't the way that we see the cause as what happened, and the effect is the holiday, is the time of year. Meaning we were redeemed on Pesach, and these things happened on Pesach. Therefore, we celebrate that. It says in reality, it's the opposite. These things happened on Pesach because it was Pesach. It's not that we celebrate Pesach then because that's when we left Egypt. We left Egypt then because it was Pesach, but it was built into creation that when Hashem created the world, Hashem created time. Hashem created that time of year. The month of Nisan is a time of redemption, and Avraham with his spirit, and Yitzhak and Yaakov with their spiritual sensitivity were able to understand that and sense that, and they were able to sense that there's the significance of matzahs. It's not that we eat matzahs because they didn't have time for the dough to rise. They didn't have time for the dough to rise because the significance of matzahs, there's a significance to that on Pesach. And the 4 cups of wine as well, there's significance to that on Pesach, which is why there were 4 stages of our redemption. Okay, so now in verse 26, then his father Yitzhak said to him, "Come close to me, please kiss my son, kiss me, my son." So he drew close, he kissed him, and then he blessed him. His blessing was, in verse 28, he said, see, 27, I'm saying, "See the fragrance of my son," on page 139, "See the fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of a field which Hashem has blessed. And may Hashem give you of the dew of the heavens and the fatness of the earth and abundant grain and wine. People will serve you and regimes will prostrate themselves to you. Be a lord to your kinsmen, your mother's son will prostrate themselves to you. Cursed be those who curse you, blessed be those who bless you." Okay, that's the blessing that he gave Yaakov, thinking he was Yitzhak. Thinking he was Esau. So then, as Yaakov left, Esau's coming in and brings him. And in verse 32, Yitzhak, his father, said to him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm your firstborn son, Esau." Then Yitzhak trembled at great perplexity and said, "Where is the one who hunted game?" And then he said, "Indeed," in the end of verse 33, "Indeed, he shall remain blessed." Meaning he affirmed the blessing. He gave it to Yaakov thinking he was Esau. Now that he saw his mistake, he recognized that Yaakov deserved it and affirmed the blessing. Indeed, he shall remain blessed. In verse 34, when Esau heard his father's words, he cried out an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me too, father." But he said, "Your brother came with cleverness and took your blessing." He said, "It's because his name was called Yaakov. He outwitted me. Have you not?" And in 141, page 141, "He took away my birthright, and see, now he took away my blessing." Then he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Verse 37, Yitzhak answered and he said to Esau, "Behold, O Lord, I have made him over you, and all his kin I have given to him as servants. With grain and wine have I supported him, and for you, what can I do, my son?" And Esau said to his father, "Have you but one blessing, father? Bless me too, father." And Esau raised his voice and wept. In verse 39, so Yitzhak his father answered and said to him, "Behold, the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, and the dew of the heavens from above. By your sword you shall live, but your brother you shall serve. Yet it shall be that when you are aggrieved, you may cast off his yoke from upon your neck." Now Esau wanted to kill Yaakov, and so Rivka, knowing this, told Yaakov to flee to her brother Lavan to Haran and stay there until Esau's wrath subsides. And Rivka also went to Yitzhak and told him that we should find a wife for Yaakov and not from the Canaanite women. So Yitzhak also told Yaakov to go to Lavan and Haran for a different reason, to find a wife who's from the family. But back to this Yaakov stealing the blessings. It says that why was it? Well, first, a later question. It says that Yitzhak told Esau, "I can't give you a blessing. I gave it to Yaakov already." And Esau said, "Do you have only one blessing?" And so Yitzhak answered him and says, "Behold, of the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, of the dew of the heaven from above." That's very similar to the blessing he gave Yaakov. The blessing he gave Yaakov may Hashem give you the dew of the heaven and the fatness of the earth, and a very similar blessing. So what did he? Do you have one blessing? And then he gave the same one. And a bigger question is, what was Yitzhak thinking? Did he really think, maybe he didn't see the bad in Esav, but did he really think that Esav was the one to succeed him rather than Yaakov? And our sages say no. Yitzhak he knew that Esav wasn't on the same level as Yaakov. That he knew. But if you look at the blessings he gave, they're blessings in the physical world. He basically said, you'll be rich. You'll be materially successful. That you should have the dew of the heaven and the fatness of the earth and abundant grain and wine. People will serve you. Regimes will prostrate themselves to you. Those are all in this world. And Yitzhak thought that he had two sons. One of them would inherit this world and one would get the next world. And he thought that I'll give this world to Esav, the next world, the spiritual world, to Yaakov. But Rivka knew better. And Rivka knew that would never work. The Beis Halevi understands that what Rivka wanted is that everything should go to Yaakov. This world and the next should go to Yaakov. And when Esav gets it, but she didn't want Yaakov to really live in this world and to be so attached to this world. So Esav would take it from Yaakov. But if it really belongs to Yaakov, there are two advantages. First of all, he could use it for mitzvah. And if it really belongs to Yaakov, he could use this world for a mitzvah. And instead, we don't live purely spiritually. We don't live like hermits and afflict ourselves and go out into the wilderness purely. We live in this world. We live in the physical world. We make kiddush and have good wine. We eat meat on Shabbos and good cholent. And when we use this world for a mitzvah, we're gaining spirituality, living in the physical world. So she wanted Yaakov to own the physical world. And also when it's taken away from us, when the physical world is taken away from us by our enemies, so that's a punishment for us. Whereas if it didn't belong to us in the first place, if this world is given to Esav and we never had a part of it, so then us not having it wouldn't be any kind of punishment. And we wouldn't get any kind of atonement for that. So Rivka wanted it all to be given to Yaakov, and that's why Yaakov got the blessing. And that explains the difference between the blessing that Yaakov got and the blessing that afterwards Yitzchak gave Esav. That to Yaakov, the blessing in verse 28, it's, and may God give you the dew of the heaven, the fatness of the earth, that it's Hashem is giving you this. Whereas if you look at the blessing to Esav, it doesn't say Hashem should give you. It says, behold, of the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, and the dew of the heavens from above. He's saying you'll have it. Not that Hashem's giving it to you, because it won't be yours. You're going to take it. But you're going to have the dew of the heaven. You're going to have all these spiritual blessings, but they're not going to be yours. They'll be taken from your brother, from Yaakov, but they really belong to him. Okay? And the Parsha ends in verse 6, on the bottom of 143, verse 6. So when Esav saw that Yitzhak blessed Yaakov and sent him off to Padan Aram to take himself away from there, and he blessed him, he commanded him, saying, you shall not take a wife among the daughters of Canaan. Actually, I'll back up a little more from there. Still on page 143, chapter 28, verse 3, when Yitzhak is sending him away to Padan Aram, to Lavan, to find a wife. So he blessed him, may Kel Shakai bless you, make you fruitful and make you numerous, and may you be a congregation of peoples. May he grant you the blessing of Avram to you and your offspring with you, that you may possess the land of your sojourners, which God gave to Avram. Now, this was the blessing that he always planned to give to Yaakov. Whereas before he planned that the physical blessing should be to Esav and the spiritual blessing should be to Yaakov. Now Yaakov's getting the blessing. He got the physical blessing from Esav. Now Yitzchak is giving him the blessing that was always planned to be for him, that he should be Kel Shakai, once again, in the name of Hashem. He should bless you, be fruitful, make you numerous, may you be a congregation of peoples. May he grant you the blessing of Avram to get the land of Israel. The Holy Land should be the land that was always to be given to Yitzchak. Okay, so that's what happened, and he went away to Padan Aram to Lavan, and in verse 8, then Esav perceived that when Esav saw that Yaakov was sent to Lavan, he perceived that the daughters of Canaan were evil in the eyes of Yitzchak his father. So Esav went to Yishmael and took Machlas, the daughter of Yishmael, son of Abram, the sister of Nevoias, in addition to his wives, as a wife for himself. And the Medrash actually says that actually brought pleasure to to Avraham that this wife was finally, he married a wife that was appropriate. It was from the family, a daughter of Yishmael, and he finally married an appropriate wife. Okay, just very quick note on the Haftarah on page 1137. So tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh, but Shabbos is not, so I believe it's the regular Haftarah or Toldos. And it's from the prophet Malachi, and it begins the prophetic burden of the word of Hashem through Malachi. I loved you, said Hashem, and you said, how have you loved us? Was not Esav a brother of Yaakov, the word of Hashem, yet I loved Yaakov. But I hated Esav and made his mountains desolation, a heritage for the desert serpent. Though Edom, the descendant of Esav, said that we have become destitute, we shall return and rebuild the ruins. So said Hashem after legions, they may build, but I shall tear down, meaning that Hashem's affirming the choice of Yaakov over Esav and how Esav will be punished, ultimately be punished. And the Haftarah ends in a prophecy to the Kohanim in verse 6, at the bottom of 1138. The teaching of truth was in his mouth, and no injustice was found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and fairness, and he turned many away from sin. For the lips of a Kohen shall safeguard knowledge, and they shall seek teaching from his mouth. For he is an agent of Hashem, master of legions, telling us how a real leader and teacher of the Jewish people should act.